That summer, by the river, when the nets were still damp with the dawn, and the cicadas kept the day in a steady hum, I learned to listen with more than my ears. The village lay along a ribbon of dirt road that glowed gold in the afternoons, and our house stood with its back to a wobbly fence and a garden that smelled of mint and rain. I was 10, old enough to fetch my own bread from the bakery down the lane, young enough still to run to the edge of the field when the clouds gathered like soft bruises in the sky. The air there had a way of lifting small worries up into the branches of the trees and letting them drift away, as if the world itself had decided to slow down for a season and grant us the grace of noticing. Grandfather rose early, his breath a steady flame in the cold air, hands black with soil from the night's work. He spoke little, but when he did, it came out as a small weathered wisdom, the kind you carry around in your chest long after the words have faded from memory. Grandma kept the mercy of a kitchen, a windowed room filled with the glow of morning light, a kettle singing on a coal stove, the wooden chairs that creaked with every breath you took. The day would begin with tea poured into chipped cups, and the ritual of sitting side by side, listening to the sound of rain that hadn't fallen yet, but was clearly promised. That summer, the river was a patient teacher. It wore the colour of old pennies, and let us walk along its banks as if we were coins being tested by the current. The nets had to be laid just so, the knots tied with a careful hand, the rope coaxed like a stubborn horse into surrender. The first hours of the day smelled of damp wool, fish scales, and sun-warmed wood. There was a particular sting to the air when the river lifted its edge, a faint metallic note that made your skin prickle in a way nothing else could until you learned to listen for it. I remember the moment most clearly, because it landed with the suddenness of a small hinge clicking into place, and stayed there, quiet and sure, long after the hinge would need oiling again. A friend of grandfather's, a quiet man with skin weathered to map-like wrinkles, showed me how to mend the net when a corner of it tore. He spoke little, but his eyes held a patient warmth that said, without saying it aloud, that the world wouldn't fall apart if I slowed down and paid attention. He laid the torn edge between two fingers and pulled, the way you preserve a bad memory, by turning it until it looks right. He taught me to fold the strands with a rhythm that matched the beating of the river, to pinch and pull rather than yank, to trust that even a frayed edge could hold if treated with care and time. I watched as he worked, and the scent of damp rope rose around us, sharp and clean, like a memory you can almost taste. The sun climbed higher, and the water glimmered with a light so pale it seemed almost a memory of light, rather than light itself. The net, once a stubborn tangle, began to take shape again, and with it a small sense of order returned to my own breath. When I finally tied the last knot, I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the sun. It was as if the act of repair had repaired something in me too, some knot of impatience or fear that I hadn't noticed before. That afternoon, something in me shifted, an understanding that the day's small duties could hold a life upright if you carried them with care. It wasn't a thunderclap or a single grand gesture, but a quiet accumulation of moments. The way the water's edge lapped at the shore in a rhythm that sounded like an old, patient lullaby. The way Grandma's hands moved with a soft certainty while she peeled peppers, counting herbs as though counting out the reasons not to hurry. The way Grandfather's voice rose only when he needed to say a truth, gently enough not to frighten a child. The river carried more than fish that season. It carried us, too. My cousin with her laughter like a bright bird. My younger sister with a stubborn curl that kept escaping from her braid. My mother with a smile that trembled when she was most sure of something she couldn't quite name. It carried also the small, almost unnoticeable losses we did not yet know would be losses. The summer that would end and leave behind only the memory of wind in the willows. The approaching winter when the house would feel too large for the heart that had just begun to understand how people shelter one another with the simple act of being present. There is a moment at the far end of that summer, a moment I seldom tell without a catch in my throat, because it feels too tender to name aloud. We had caught a single young eel, its body slick and glistening as a night-dark bead. It wriggled with a stubborn life that wanted to slip through every crease of our fingers. Grandfather laid his own palm over mine and showed me how to cradle it, not to squeeze, but to hold steady, as one holds a fragile memory. It reminded me that the world can be small and still insist on existing with all its ordinary gravity. How a creature's breath and heartbeat can hitch a ride into your own chest and stay there, teaching you to care for something other than yourself. We released the eel back into the river, and when it disappeared into the murk of the reeds, I felt a release of air from somewhere deep inside me. Not fear exactly, but a kind of quiet awe. The river kept whispering its patient lesson, that life is not fireworks, but a steady flame, and that a single responsible act can stretch a person wider than they imagined. After that day, I began to measure time differently, by the hours in a net's life, by the stretch of a quiet afternoon, by how long a kitchen clock could keep faith with the breath you took while listening to rain beginning to fall. That memory stays with me most strongly when I am old, and the room is still, and the only sounds are the rain's soft tapping on the sill, and the slow turning of old wooden wheels in the mind. In those moments, I can smell the river again, wet wool, mossy banks, the faint tang of fish scales, and I can see the kitchen's glow spilling onto the linoleum, Grandma's hands moving with the same patient rhythm as the nets. I realized then what that summer's lesson was really about. Not just how to mend a net, but how to mend a life. To mend a life, you begin with small, honest tasks, and you finish with the decision to stay. You stay for the next breath, the next dawn, the next person who needs a patient ear or a shared shade on a hot day. The years that followed did not spare me the ordinary sorrows, the weather that wore down fields, the people who walked away, the quiet griefs that arrive like uninvited guests and linger beyond good manners. Yet in every corner of my days where a memory could drift in, I find the same old scent rope and rain and river, and the same old rhythm, the careful, slow kindness of hands that know how to mend. I learned to listen, not only with my ears, but with the space between them, where a heartbeat calls to another heartbeat, and the world becomes safe enough to tell the truth, even when the truth is only this: I am here, and I will do the next thing kindly. Now I am old enough to see how the small acts accumulate into a life. The summers are fewer, the rivers thinner, the nets more fragile with age. Yet the quiet is still there, a companion that refuses to be silenced by the noise of the days. I still measure time by kitchens and storms, by the weight of a rope in my palm, and the soft fall of a name spoken across a table. I still hear the distant laughter of cousins and feel the salt wind on my skin, as if the river itself were calling me back to remember who I became, because I learned to attend to the moment in front of me, and to attend to the people beside me with steady hands and a patient heart. If I could speak to the girl I once was, I tell her that every routine she learned